Get up. Now. You're holding up everybody's shift.
17 pages. Every minute you stole from this company, right there.
I said get up, Williams. I'm not asking twice.
The BIS 47 promise, get up. Now, you're holding up everybody's shift. Gerald Vance slapped a stack of printouts onto the break room table. 17 pages, stapled twice, each one stamped with a red instant label he'd printed himself. The fluorescent light buzzed over the Crosstown Sense Transit Depot on Mack Avenue, and 11 drivers in their blue jackets went very still over their breakfast. Tasha Williams did not get up. She set down her thermos. She folded her hands on the table the way her father had taught to fold them when a man wanted you to flinch. And she looked at the supervisor standing over her, his lanyard swinging, his jaw working like he'd already won. "You let 4 people ride for free last week," Gerald said, loud enough for the whole room. "You held the 47 at Gradiot and Harper for 90 seconds for some old man who can barely walk. 90 seconds, Williams. You think the schedule is a suggestion? You think this is a charity?" He tapped the stack. "I've got it all right here. Every minute you stole from this company. People like you are exactly why this route loses money." A younger driver near the vending machine laughed under his breath. Somebody else muttered the word that had followed Tasha around the depot for 2 years now. Saint Tasha. They didn't say it kind. Tasha still didn't get up. She just looked at the 17 pages, and then back at Gerald, calm as still water, and said one quiet thing that made the room go quieter than the red label on those printouts. "Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight." Have you ever been put on trial for the only good thing you knew how to do? Have you ever stood there while a man with a clipboard added up your kindness like it was a debt and called it theft? To understand why Tasha Williams sat so still that morning, and why 3 weeks later, the most decorated jazz institution in the city of Detroit would stop a 500-person gala to call her name, you have to go back where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. Back before the printouts, on the last northbound run of Route 47, when the temperature dropped to 31 degrees, and a man in a long gray coat climbed on board and said absolutely nothing at all. Route 47 ran the spine of the east side, from the Rosa Parks Transit Center up Gratiot to the edge of East Point and back, and the last run left downtown at 11:40 p.m. Nobody wanted the night shift, where the machine defroll was 85 cents an hour, and the riders were the ones the daytime city forgot about. Third shift nurses, dishwashers from the Greektown kitchens, where a man who cleaned the floors at the casino and smelled like bleach and cigarettes. Tasha had driven that run for 2 years. She knew them all by the way they climbed the steps. She knew Miss Odette, who got on at McDougal with her church bag and got off 3 stops later at the dialysis center. She knew the kid, a grown man, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, really, who fell asleep against the window every night and needed someone to wake him at his stop, or he'd ride to the end of the line and back. She kept a roll of quarters in the coin tray under her seat, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, her own quarter. Somebody came up the steps counting change with shaking hands and came up short. Where the machines rattled the floor, $1.75. Tasha had learned a long time ago that $1.75 was sometimes the exact distance between a person and the rest of their night. The machines rattled the floor until midnight. There is a craft to driving a 40-foot morning that nobody who hasn't done it understands. Coach 4471 was a 2008 model with 250,000 miles, the odometer, and a wandering steering box that pulled half an ounce left on cold mornings. And Tasha knew that bus the way a violinist knows a borrowed instrument. Every shudder, every dead spot in the brakes, the exact temperature at which the rear door froze and had to be coaxed. She drove by the rhythm of the lights, hitting the Gradiot corridor's timed greens at a steady 22 miles an hour, so she'd never have to slam the brakes on a sleeping passenger. She read the road for black ice by the way the streetlights doubled on the asphalt, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. She knew which stops to pull tight to the curb, so a woman in heels at the step down into a puddle. None of that was in the operator's manual. Her father used to say the manual taught you to drive the bus, but the people on it taught you to drive it right. And she watched the fare box the way some drivers never bothered to. The box on 4471 was a temperamental old cubic model that jammed if you fed it 3 bills too fast, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and Tasha had learned to listen that tapped clean, and one that beeped its flat refusal, the sound of somebody whose account had run dry. That sound, more than anything, was the one she'd trained herself never to ignore. In the summer of 2009, in the break bay of Hollis & Son Garage on Mack Avenue, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, her father had stood with grease to his elbows. Eldridge Williams fixed transit buses for 31 years for the city, and he used to say the same thing every time a coach came in beat to hell, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. Baby, anybody can drive the route when the bus is full of people who matter. You find out who somebody is by how they treat the last passenger on the last run, where the machines rattled the floor until counting. He died of a stroke in 2014 in the same garage on a Thursday. Tasha kept his old fare punch in her jacket pocket. She touched it sometimes at red lights. So when the man in the gray coat got on at the Eastern Market stop that Tuesday in October, Tasha did what her father taught her. She paid attention. He was old, 70, maybe more, though it was hard to tell. His coat was good wool once, now thin at the elbows. He moved slow, one careful step at a time, holding the rail like the bus might pitch out from under him. And he carried a case. Not a duffel, not a grocery sack like the other late riders. A hard black case, scuffed pale at every corner, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. The kind of case Tasha couldn't place that first night. He tapped his card. He didn't have enough. The machine beeped its flat little refusal. He started to turn around. He didn't argue, didn't explain. Just turned to go back down the steps into the cold, like a man who had been turned around plenty of times before and had stopped expecting anything else. "Sir." Tasha already had 2 quarters and $1 from her own tray in her hand. She dropped them in the box before he could say a word. "We're good. Go on, find a seat. It's warmer in the back over the heater." He stopped. He looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his face she couldn't read. Not gratitude exactly, something older and more tired than that, where the machines rattled the floor until night. Then he went to the back to the long bench seat over the rear heater, set the black case on his knees with both hands, and looked out the window at the dark city sliding by. He rode to the end of the line. He rode all the way back, where the machines rattled the floor and said, "Thank you, miss," in a voice like gravel under velvet, and walked off into the dark on Russell Street. He came back the next night, and the night after. Same stop, same case, never enough fare. Tasha covered it every time and never asked him for a dime. And for 3 weeks, the old man in the gray coat was just the quietest, most regular passenger on the loneliest run in the city. She didn't know who he was, but somebody at the depot had started keeping score. Gerald Vance had been a route supervisor for 6 years and a believer in the rule book for his whole life. He wasn't a cruel man the way he saw it. He was a correct. The Transit Authority had a $1.8 million budget shortfall and a new efficiency mandate from the city, and Gerald had decided, somewhere in those long meetings about on-time performance percentages, that the problem with Crosstown wasn't the underfunding or the broken fare boxes or the routes that hadn't been redrawn since 1979. The problem was drivers who didn't follow procedure. The problem was people like Tasha Williams. He started pulling her GPS logs. He had access to the AVL system, the automatic vehicle location data, every coach pinging its position every 15 seconds. And he sat in his office on the 2nd floor, printing out every dwell time violation he could find. A 90-second hold at Gratiot and Harper. A bus that left a stop 11 seconds late, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He had a spreadsheet. He had a theory, is the most dangerous kind of man there is, because he has already decided he is right, and everything he finds will only prove it, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. What Gerald didn't write in his spreadsheet was who Tasha had been holding the bus for. He didn't write down Miss Odette and her dialysis. He didn't write down the man counting quarters. He just wrote down the seconds, because seconds you can add up and put on a stack and slap on a table. The first warning came in writing on a Friday. Tasha read it standing by her coach in the cold pre-dawn yard, the paper fluttering in her hand. Failure to adhere to schedule, where an authorized fare waivers. Final written warning. She read it twice, folded it into a neat square, and put it in her jacket pocket next to her father's fare punch. She didn't argue. She had a son to think about. Andre Williams was 18, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. A freshman at Wayne County Community College. The application fee for the apprenticeship program was $420, and the deadline was in November, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. And Tasha had been putting awake in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator since August. She was $40 short. She was always $40 short, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. So when a man slaps a final warning in your hand and your son's whole future is sitting in a coffee can over the fridge, you fold the paper and you keep your mouth shut and you go drive your route. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. That night the old man got on with his case and not enough fare, and Tasha covered him anyway. Some things you don't trade even for $40, even for $420. This time, though, he didn't go straight to the back. He paused by the fare box, looked at the quarters she'd dropped in, and looked at her tired face under the dome light. "You keep paying my way," he said. "Every night. Why?" Tasha shrugged, easing the coach away from the curb. "My daddy used to fix these buses. He'd have wanted me to." The old man was quiet a moment, then, so soft she almost missed it under the engine. "What was his name?" "Eldridge Williams. Worked out of the garage on Mac 31 years. The old man's hands went still on the case in his lap. "Eldridge," he repeated, like the name was a chord he hadn't heard in a long time. He looked out the window for the rest of the run and didn't say anything else. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. But the next night he brought a small bean pies in it, the kind from the bakery on Linwood, and he left one on the dash for her without a word. And the night after that, riding the empty stretch up Graythiet past the shuttered storefronts, Tasha heard a sound from the back of the bus she had never heard there before. He was humming, low, under his breath, a melody that climbed and turned and fell back on itself, something so unhurried and so sure of where it was going that Tasha found herself easing off the gas just to stay inside it longer. She didn't know the song. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. She didn't know that the man humming it in the back of her empty bus had once played that exact melody to 19,000 people at the Montrez Festival in 1981, or that the album it came from had sold 4 million copies, or that the music world had spent 20 years assuming he was dead. She just knew it was the most beautiful thing she'd heard on Route 47 in 2 years, and she let the bust on a Wednesday. It came in the form of an incident report, filed by Gerald Vance, dated at October 29th. The report stated that at 12:14 a.m., Coach 4471, operated by Tasha Williams, had run the red light at Graythiet and Mount Elliott at speed, endangering a pedestrian, and had failed to report the violation. The report recommended immediate termination for cause. It was signed, stamped, and walked straight up to the operations manager's desk. A driver terminated for cause forfeits severance, forfeits the apprenticeship reimbursement program, forfeits everything. Tasha got the call to come to the depot on her day off. She sat across the desk from the operations manager and Gerald Vance and a woman from HR, and she listened to them read out a thing she knew with absolute certainty had not happened. "I didn't run that light," she said quietly. "Where the machines rattled the floor midnight. I stop at Mount Elliott. There's a man who waits there some nights." Gerald leaned back. "The report's right here, Williams. 12:14 a.m. You want to call me a liar?" Now here is the thing about a man like Gerald Vance. He had been so sure he was right for so long that he had gotten lazy about being careful. Because the machine you build your whole life on the rule book, you forget that the rule book cuts both ways. Tasha didn't raise her voice. She had never once raised her voice in that depot. She just said, "The coach has a forward camera, and the AVL pings its position every 15 seconds. Pull the log for 4471 at 12:14. The camera and the GPS will say exactly where that bus was and exactly how fast it was going." The room went still. Tasha knew that system better than Gerald did, and the reason was buried in a break bay on Mack Avenue. When the machetes rattled the floor until fleet with the clever devices AVL units back in 2011, it was her father who'd spent that whole winter wiring the antenna mounts and calibrating the door sensors. Coach by coach, 312 buses, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight and read them at the kitchen table like scripture. He used to tell her how the system worked. Every 15 seconds, the unit logged latitude, longitude, heading, and speed, time-stamped to the second off the GPS satellites themselves. Not off a clock anybody could fudge. The forward camera ran on a continuous loop tied to the same clock. "The bus can't lie, baby," Eldridge used to say, tapping the manual. "Men lie. The bus just remembers." She had been 11 years old doing homework at that table, where the machines rattled the floor without knowing she'd need it 19 years later to save her own name. Because Gerald Vance had written 12:14 a.m. into his report from memory, from the dwell time spreadsheet he'd been keeping, and he had gotten it wrong. At 12:14 a.m. on October 29th, the AVL log showed coach 4471 stop, doors open, at the curb at Gratiot and Mount Elliott, stationary for 41 seconds, speed 0, heading north. The forward camera showed an empty intersection, a green light, and an old man in a gray coat climbing slowly up the steps with a black case in his hands. There was no pedestrian, there was no red light. There was a falsified report with a timestamp that the bus itself, in cold machine honesty, contradicted. The operations manager looked at the log on his screen for a long time. Then he looked at Gerald. But Gerald Vance did not back down. He doubled down, the way his kind always does. The exact minute is a clerical detail, he snapped. The pattern is what matters. She's been waiving fares and holding the schedule for weeks. I have 17 pages. Whether it was 12:14 or 12:15, the woman is a liability and a thief, and if this company has any standards left, she's gone today. And so the next morning, in the break room on Mack Avenue, with 11 drivers watching, Gerald Vance slapped 17 pages on the table and told Tasha Williams to get up. She didn't. She just looked at him and said the quiet thing. "You wrote 12:14, Gerald," she said, "but the bus knows where it was, and so do I, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight." Then she gathered her thermos and her final warning folded into a neat square, and she walked out of the depot into the gray October light. Suspended pending review, her son's apprenticeship fee still $40 short in a coffee can over the fridge, and she had no idea that 2 miles away, in an office above a shuttered theater on Woodward, a woman named Loretta Hayes had just opened a sealed letter that would change everything. The Cornelius Booker Jazz Legacy Foundation existed for one reason: to find the man it was named after. In 1981, Cornelius "Sonny" Booker was the most important jazz pianist alive. The album, Midnight on Gratiot, 12 tracks recorded in a single night in a studio on the east side of Detroit, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, had sold 4 million copies and won every honor the genre had to give. And then, in the spring of 1985, after his wife and his only daughter were killed by a drunk driver on the Lodge Freeway, Sonny Booker walked off a stage in the middle of a set his piano lid down gently, and disappeared. No funeral appearance, no interviews, nothing. For 20 years the world assumed grief had finished what the freeway started. The foundation never stopped looking. Loretta Hayes, his goddaughter, had built it stone by stone. The scholarships, the youth program, the annual gala, partly to honor him and partly, she always admitted, because she could not let herself believe he was gone. And every year at the gala, she left one chair empty at the head table, just in case. The letter she opened that October morning was written in a hand she would have known anywhere, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He was alive. He had been living in a single room above a laundromat on Russell Street for 19 years, under the name his mother gave him before the world ever knew the other one, where the machines rattled the floor and tired, and that he had decided it was time to come back, but not for the reason they'd think. He wasn't coming back for the music. The music had died with his daughter on the lodge. He was coming back because he had finally found what he'd spent 20 years looking for. He had found the person he wanted to leave it all to. The rights to Midnight on Gratiot, the royalties, the foundation's future. All of it. And in the letter, he told Loretta exactly how he had found her. "There is a woman who drives the number 47 bus on the night shift," he wrote. "For 3 weeks she paid my fare out of her own pocket and never once asked my name. She held the bus in the cold for an old man she thought was nobody. Her father fixed these buses for 31 years. I have been auditioning the whole world for 20 years, Loretta. And I never told a soul because I wanted to see who people are when they think no one important is watching. This one, her name is Tasha Williams. Find her. Bring her to the gala. I want the whole city to see who I chose and why." The gala was held the second Saturday of November in the grand ballroom of the Marlowe, 500 guests in black tie, where the machines rattled the floor, Metra, and a single empty chair at the head table that had sat empty for 20 years, where the machines almost didn't go. The invitation had come by certified mail, and she'd assumed it was a mistake. or worse, some kind of cruel joke from the depot. But Loretta Hayes had called her personally, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and there had been something in closer to awe that made Tasha put on the one good dress she owned, the navy one she'd worn to her father's funeral, and take the bus downtown. She rode the 53, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. She sat at a table near the back with strangers in jewelry that cost more than her car, and she felt every inch out of place, and she had no idea why she was there. Until the lights dimmed, and Loretta Hayes walked to the microphone, and behind her 2 attendants wheeled out a grand piano and set beside it on a small velvet table under a single spotlight a scuffed black case. Tasha's breath caught. She knew that case. She had watched that case ride to the end of the line and back for 3 weeks. She had watched Old Man Earth with both hands like man hold it on his knees with both hands, like it was the last thing on earth that was still his. 20 years ago, Loretta said, and the ballroom went silent. This city lost its greatest voice. Tonight, he is asked to come home, and he is asked to do something none of us expected. She turned toward the wings. Ladies and gentlemen, Cornelius Booker. And the old man in the gray coat walked out into the light. 500 people rose to their feet at once, a sound like a wave breaking. Cameras flashed. Somewhere a woman was openly weeping. Sonny Booker raised one hand, gentle, and the room sat. He did not go to the piano. He went to the microphone, slow, one careful step at a time, the way he climbed the steps of a bus. And he looked out over all that wealth and all that history, and he said, "Before I play one note for you, and I will play, one more time, I promise, I have to do the thing I came back to do. There is a woman in this room who does not know why she's here. She has been paying my bus fare for 3 weeks, $1.75 at a time, out of her own pocket, on the worst paid shift this city's got. She held a bus in 31-degree cold for an old man she thought was nobody. She never asked my name. She never wanted a thing." The machines rattled the floor until midnight. He found her like he'd always known exactly where she was sitting. Tasha Williams, daughter of Eldridge Williams, who fixed the buses I rode for 31 years and never knew he was carrying a king home every night. A soft, broken sound moved through the crowd, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. I have spent 20 years looking for the one thing I had left to give. I didn't want to give it to someone who deserved it. The world is full of people who deserve things. I wanted to give it to someone who didn't need anyone to be watching. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and I found her on the back of the 47 bus. He told them everything then. He told them about the fare box and the quarters and the bean pies, and the night he heard her ease off the gas just to let his humming finish. He told them what her father said in the garage in 2009. Anybody can drive the route when the bus is full of people who matter. You find out who somebody is by how they treat the last passenger on the last run. Where the machines rattled the floor until night, he told them about the 19 years above the laundromat on Russell Street, the single room, the upright piano he'd bought for $40 and never once played, because every time he lifted the lid, he saw his daughter's hands on the keys. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He told them he had ridden 100 different bus routes in 100 different cities, paying with exact change, watching how the world treated an old man it had decided was no one. And he told them that in all that time, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, in all those cities had ever dropped her own quarters in the box without being asked, and done it again the next night, and the next, where the machines rattled the floor and to see if anyone had noticed. And then Loretta Hayes stepped back to the microphone and said the second thing, the thing that made a man in the third row stand up so fast his chair fell over. "We are aware," Loretta said evenly, "that 3 weeks ago, Crosstown City Transit suspended Ms. Williams pending termination for waiving fares for holding the bus. We are aware a supervisor filed a report stating she ran a red light at 12:14 a.m. on October 29th. She paused. "We have a copy of the bus camera footage from that exact minute. Would you like to know what the camera shows?" The room held its breath. "It shows an empty intersection, a green light, and Mr. Booker climbing the steps of her bus. She didn't run a light. She stopped. For him." The report was false. And the man who wrote it is, I believe, here tonight as a guest of the Transit Authority's table, where Gerald Vance turned toward the Transit Authority. Vance sat in a rented tuxedo with a glass of wine halfway to his mouth, and the wine did not make it the rest of the way. Now, here is where you expect the part where she destroys him, where Tasha Williams stands up, and the foundation lawyer reads out the falsified report line by line, and Gerald Vance is fired in front of 500 people, and the crowd cheers, and justice tastes like blood. That is not what happened, and the reason it didn't is the whole reason Sonny Booker chose her. Tasha stood where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. The spotlight swung to her, and her navy funeral dress was the cheapest fabric in that whole gleaming room. She walked to the front because Loretta gestured her up, and Sonny Booker took both her hands in his, and the cameras went off like a storm. And when they finally put a microphone in front of her and waited for her to say the thing, Tasha Williams looked out at all those people, and then she looked at the man at the transit table with his ruined night. And she said, "I'd have heard the ice melt in 500 glasses." You could have heard the ice melt in 500 glasses. "I don't," she said again, steadier. "He's wrong about me. He's been wrong about me for 2 years. But firing a man doesn't make him right, and it doesn't make me kind. My daddy didn't teach me that." She turned to Loretta, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. "If Mr. Booker wants to give the foundation something in my name, don't give it to me. There's about 40 drivers working the night shift in this city for 85 cents extra an hour, hauling the people nobody else will haul at 1 in the morning in the cold. Put it toward them. Put a roll of quarters in every fare box for the ones who come up short. That's all I ever did. That's all this ever was." Sonny Booker started to laugh. A real one, deep and cracked open, the first one Loretta had heard from him in 20 years. He squeezed her hands. "You see," he said to the room, to all of them. "You see why?" Then he walked to the piano, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and his hands just hovered over the keys, trembling, the way they had not trembled in front of 19,000 people at Montreux, but trembled now in front of 500. And then, for the first time since 1985, where the machine the floor midnight. He set hands down and he played Midnight on Greyshot, the whole 12 minutes of it, for a woman who had never heard it before and had let it run slow on an empty bus anyway. People who were there said later that the room did not breathe. They said the last note hung in the air over the chandeliers for a full 5 seconds before anyone could bear to break it with applause. The story made the front page of the Free Press by Monday. The Transit Authority, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, in the careful language of an institution caught in a spotlight, announced that Ms. Williams was reinstated effective immediately, with back pay, and that it was launching an internal review of incident reporting procedures. The falsified report was the centerpiece of that review. Gerald Vance was not fired. Tasha had asked them not to, and the foundation had made her wish a condition of a very public, very generous donation, so the authority listened. But a man cannot survive the thing Gerald Vance could not survive, which was the truth of himself, laid out in cold machine honesty next to a green light and an empty intersection. He was reassigned off operations. 17 pages went into a file nobody opened again, and every driver in that depot now knew exactly what kind of supervisor signs his name to a timestamp he never checked. He resigned within the year, not because anyone made him, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, because the rulebook he'd read back to him, line by line, and it did not say what he'd always assumed it said. Andre Williams started his electrician's apprenticeship the following spring, where the $420 fee was paid in full by something called the Eldridge Williams Night Shift Fund, established by the Cornelius Booker Jazz Legacy Foundation, which to this day puts a roll of quarters in the fare box of every late-night coach in the city. Tasha's quarters multiplied by a king's gratitude, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, riding the loneliest routes so that no one has to turn around in the cold and walk back down the steps. The coffee can over the refrigerator stayed where it was. Tasha kept feeding it $20 a week out of habit, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and when it filled up she'd hand it to whichever driver in the depot looked like they were $40 short of something that mattered. The story did something to that depot, too. Drivers who'd snickered at St. Tasha for 2 years started leaving their own quarters in their own trays. Miss Odette never had to count change for the dialysis run again. And the 11 people who'd watched Gerald Vance slap 17 pages on a break room table all remembered, now, that they had said nothing, and most of them never let themselves stay that quiet again. Tasha kept driving the 47. She turned down a job offer from the foundation, a desk, and a salary and a window. She said she did her best thinking behind the wheel, and besides, Somebody had to wake the kid who fell asleep against the window. Sonny Booker rode with her, where the machines rattled the floor until the end. He didn't have to pay his fare anymore. He never had to, really. But he always tapped 2 quarters into the box anyway, every single night, and he'd catch her eye in the big mirror, and neither one of them ever said a word about it. Her father was right in the break bay on Mack Avenue, with grease to his elbows all those years ago. You find out who somebody is by how they treat the last passenger on the last run, when nobody's watching, and nobody's counting. What he didn't say, what maybe he didn't know, is that sometimes, on the last run in the dark, the last passenger turns out to be the one who was watching all along.